And he uses his expertise in content design management and agile content production to help organizations create quality content and maximize the effectiveness of their content teams. Very topical for today, of course. He also advises organizations on how to set up and deliver successful web content projects and coaches them through the process and provides content design teams to make it happen. He's currently helping the University of Southampton shape and deliver their content-led digital transformation project, OneWeb. Previously, Padma was head of content design at the Government Digital Service, and he had overall responsibility for the quality of content on gov.uk, which is, of course, the award-winning website of the UK government. Padma has also written a book for Gather Content, actually, called Lead with Content, and one of the chapters in that book is about organising a content team. So on that note, Padma, it's over to you.
Great, thanks very much, Rob, and hello world. So we're going to be talking today about different ways to organise your content team and actually to think about how best to organise your content function. As Rob says, I've done a fair bit of managing and setting up delivery teams of different sizes and different kinds, generally in quite large organisations, but also dealing with much smaller organisations. So hopefully, no matter where you are at the moment, there'll be something relevant to you in your place of work. Okay, so let's crack on. What am I going to say first? I'm going to say there are 4 basic content team shapes. And so I'll kind of go through those in a bit of detail, and then as we kind of get further in, I'll talk a little bit about how that relates to agile. I'm not going to talk in detail about agile ways of working today, but I will briefly introduce it and then talk about how kind of content fits in with that. The 4 basic ways of organising a content team. You've got a distributed team, a central team, the hub and spoke model, and the matrix model. So that's what I'm going to talk about first. So let's think about what is a common setup, and you may find this familiar. So generally, when I'm going into different organisations all around the place, different countries, different sectors, I often find that content professionals and comms professionals live their life like that. All day, every day, firefighting. So they're as efficient as it's possible to be. They're very skilled up. But the way that things are set up means that even as efficient as they are and as skilled up as they are, all they're doing is kind of like keeping utter chaos at bay. And it's often a thankless task being a content professional. And this is partly because of the way things are organised. So we'll look at some different ways that you might be able to organise things. So yeah, this may be familiar to you. You're happily plodding along in your life, and you get some urgent request by email or face-to-face or through your ticketing system. Can you put this live by the end of today? It's urgent. You might not be entirely convinced that it's urgent. Quite often the person who's requesting it and saying it's urgent knew about it 3 months ago, but as it is, the way that you're set up, you just have to deal with it. And you take a look at what they're asking you to publish, and actually it's not very good. But you've not got any time. There's a deadline that's been set. You don't really have any time to do anything significant with it to improve it, and you also don't have the power to improve it. You might be able to plain English it a little bit and suggest that maybe the kind of some of the words that are 4 syllables and longer might want to be cut down a little bit, but apart from that, that's about the limit of your editorial impact. And so what that means is that content that you know isn't very good goes live on your website, and that makes you feel bad. And that happens again and 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 again. And eventually you get to Friday evening and you go off and you shoot things on Xbox, or you go to the bar, or you do whatever you do to feel good about life, and then Monday comes around and you do it all again. And that's the kind of the firefighting world of many a content professional in my experience. What that way of working means is no matter how good you are and no matter how efficient you are, there's no time for strategic work. Like just keeping things going takes up all of your time. So you can't do anything strategic. So you might understand how to do content strategy, but you don't have any way of executing a strategic approach. So this is a kind of worst case scenario of what is called a distributed model. And it's called a distributed model because basically content is drafted all over the organization. So the content function is distributed throughout the organization. Sometimes they'll publish it directly, they'll have publishing rights on your content management system. Sometimes the workflow will be set up that you publish it, but you don't have much say as to what is written and how it's written. And generally in organizations where this is the case, most people in that organization think that the website isn't very good and generally blames your team because you're supposedly in charge of the website. So how did this happen? So this is my little history of the internet story. So if you think about sort of 20 years ago, like think about the late 90s. Is that 20 years ago? Yeah, that's 20 years ago. Late 90s. And the organisation doesn't have a website and doesn't think it needs a website and probably doesn't think about the internet very much at all. But there's somebody in the organisation who says, look, this web thing is like really important. We really need a website. And so some manager or other says, all right, well, if you want to do it outside of your main work, set up a website for us and you can manage it. So Dave, the web manager, is born and he sits in a little cupboard and he keeps the website going. And a bit of time passes and more organizations start getting websites. And the organisation thinks, oh, hang on a minute, this web thing might be something that we need to pay attention to. Maybe we should get a couple more people. So they hire some more like web type manager type people, and they join Dave in the cupboard, and together they manage the website. And then a bit more time passes, and actually it looks like the internet might not be a fad, and maybe they need to take this seriously. They've got users, customers asking for this, that, and the other online. The organisation's missing out because it's not got a proper content that can deal with all the questions that are being asked. There's now a expectation that the organisation will have a website and that you'll be able to get what you need off there, more or less. So this is potentially quite an expensive undertaking. And then somebody has the idea, hang on a minute, instead of just having Dave and people in the cupboard, what we could do is we could just give all the people who know about the stuff that we do, as in the subject matter experts around the place that are actually doing the work, we could just give them publishing rights, and then they can publish things on the web. We've got this content management system thing, which makes it kind of easy, and they can just publish stuff, and then we'll have a website, and it'll have everything that we do on it, and it'll be great, and it'll be free. So that's kind of where a lot of organizations are at now. And generally what that's resulted in is very big spaghetti-like websites that are of massively varying quality. There's no strategic approach, and it's not a very good experience for users. And as the user experience is becoming better and better on competitor websites, and even websites that aren't direct competitors, like Facebook and Google and whatever, people are expecting a better user experience. And so in many organizations, the term digital transformation is starting to gather momentum, and a lot of organizations have got digital transformation programs of one kind or another. And that creates opportunities for content people who are fed up of firefighting all day So let's talk about some other ways that we can maybe organise things. So the distributed model doesn't work very well. I hope I've proven that. I guess the thing about it is, the good things about it is that it's very flexible. Like if your organisation gains another department or restructures or starts dealing with a different aspect of life, it hires people to do that work, and those people know about it and can write stuff on the web. The other thing about it is it can be closer to users, because people who are on the front line, dealing with customers, dealing with users every day, and therefore potentially know what those users need and the language that they use and so on, they can have publishing rights. And at least on the face of it, it's cheaper, because you haven't got a dedicated content function. You've just got people doing other stuff who also have right on website in their job description. But of course, we know that there are some significant disadvantages. First off, how do you communicate across the organisation about what you're doing with the content on the website? Actually, that it tends not to happen. Everybody deals with their own bit, and you can tell when you, as a user, when you look at the website, you can tell that people aren't talking to each other, because things are the same thing essentially is popping up 15 times. There are massive gaps in the knowledge. There are no intuitive user journeys. You can't find anything. You spend ages browsing, and exasperated, you fall on the FAQ page, because at least that might have something if you scroll through it for 20 minutes. You can't create a culture. If we're trying to create a culture of high-end user experience, good quality content, a kind of digitally savvy organisation, you can't really do that when you're working in a distributed model. You can't share best practice. For one thing, you don't know where everybody is who's involved in publishing stuff. But for another, they're probably not content professionals, and they probably don't really care that much about best practice. They probably think that, they've been writing since they were 5 or whatever, and they can do that perfectly well, thank you very much. And, writing for the web is basically writing, and I'm busy, so please don't hassle me about best practice. One of the biggies is that it's impossible to spot issues quickly, and you get organisations that have no real clue of what is on their website and how up to date it is, and whether it's leaving them open to legal challenge and so on. And there's no real way of knowing where the issues might be and when they might come back to bite you. And as I said, often a distributed model isn't made up of content professionals, but even if it is, they tend to be part of non-content teams, non-UX teams, and therefore all the other problems that we've talked about are just as applicable. So it's not an ideal situation, but if you're in that situation and it looks like you can't change it, there are things that you can do. You can kind of build in systems and processes that encourage it to work in a more strategic way, and force the content to be at least of some kind of minimum standard. And I would strongly suggest coming to my governance masterclass to find out all about that, which is happening in some point in November, and no doubt Rob will tell you about that later. Okay, so what are the better ways to organise a content team? Let's talk about them, far more exciting. The fundamental thing I would urge you to think about and try and bring about in your organisation is to split ownership of facts and ownership of how those facts are communicated. So rather than having content owners in different areas based on subject matter expertise, those subject matter experts own the facts, but they don't own the user experience. They don't own how those facts are communicated. And that forces content professionals and user experience professionals and subject matter experts in different subject matter areas of the organisation to work together to produce great content. And you need to set up a workflow and a governance model that allows for that to take place. But it's a fundamental shift when you split that ownership in that way. Things start to change. So think about how you might bring that about in your organisation if it's not already the case. So we talked about the distributed team. Let's talk about the central team, which is a way that you can put that splitting of ownership of the facts and ownership of the user experience into place. So a central team, a centralized model. Basically, you've got a team in a department that might be a digital department. Often it's an IT department or a comms department, because we've not really worked out where UX and digital stuff should sit yet in a lot of large organizations. But so that you've got a central team, central content team, which brings several advantages. It's easy to manage. They're all in the same place. You have a content lead or head of content with responsibility for overseeing the thing. You've got a delivery manager, maybe, who is responsible for making sure that the content function works efficiently, and that's that job done. Team communicates easily because they're in the same place. They're all content professionals. They speak the same language and they talk to each other regularly. So it's just easy to talk about things like, what's best practice and how should we approach this, and does anybody know where this might sit well on the website, and that sort of thing. And again, because you can communicate easily, you can spot issues quickly before they get onto the web, before they get anywhere dangerous. You can spot these issues. The best way to deal with big problems is when they're still small problems. And because you're in the same place, again, you're a central team, you can build that team culture and identity and pride and desire for excellence and quality and all the sort of good stuff that results in good quality content and a good user experience for your users. And the team can learn quickly. It's not like the opposite of the distributed model. It's the team gets better and better and better, and therefore the resulting content gets better and better and better. But there are some disadvantages to the central model. And the main one is that it doesn't scale well. If you think about, there are plenty of organizations with over 100,000 pages on the website. Whether they should have 100,000 pages or not, who knows? But, there are very large websites out there. And to manage a web estate of that size is not really possible with a central team. It would have to be very, very large and very, very expensive. So there comes a point when the centralized model breaks and you have to take a different approach. It can be seen as authoritarian. So if you have a culture or a kind of habitual way of organizing your content publishing, where you had content owners all around the organization managing their bit for 20 years and maybe quite attached to it, and then you move to a central model, and the central team all of a sudden starts saying, no, we can't publish that. We need to see, a proven user need for that, and that's not in style, so we're going to smash that to pieces and rewrite it. And actually, we're really busy, so you might not get published for a couple of weeks. And actually, half of the stuff that you've been holding on to for the last few years on the website, there's no proven user need for it. It's not getting traffic, so we're actually just going to remove it. So that's sort of, if that's not handled well, the central team can very quickly become seen as an unpleasant police force in the organisation. And they can be remote from the user. So if you've got a situation where you have distributed content writers who are frontline staff dealing with users every day, all around the country, maybe all around the world. They have a perspective and a familiarity with user needs, potentially at least, that can be missing from a central team. So if you've got if you were dealing with content in Cornwall and Edinburgh and Newcastle and Liverpool, and now your content teams are all based in London, and they're making decisions based on a perspective that doesn't include those the perspectives in those different areas, then that can be detrimental for users. And so you need to put things in place that stop that. For instance, you need user researchers. You need respectful central team that talks and listens to the stakeholders around the place and things. But that is a potential disadvantage. Okay. So we've got because the centralized model tends not to scale well. It's essentially every organisation beyond a certain size that you go into will have either a distributed model or a hub and spoke model. So let's talk about the hub and spoke model. The hub and spoke model is kind of a mix between a distributed model and a centralized model, but it's an organised mix that works quite well. So you've got the hub, which is your kind of central team, and then your different spokes are content people that have got devolved publishing rights in different parts of the organisation. And you kind of, the central team decides which types of content will be owned by which teams, and how the teams will relate to each other, and the kind of the power structure and the quality assurance systems and things like that. So the advantages of the hub and spoke. So this is a quote from The Art of War. The control of a large force is the same principle as the control of a few men / other agendas. It is merely a question of dividing up their numbers. So if you've got things set up correctly, actually, even though you might have 2,000 people with the right to publish across your entire organisation, if it's organised in the right way, you can coordinate that force, so that you can have a head of content with, and all they need to deal with is 5 content leads for different areas, and all they need to deal with is their content teams, and all they need to deal, you can span it out in that kind of, the visualization of a hub and spoke model is for that reason. So you can scale it, but you can still create a team culture, you can share learning, you can spot issues because of the way it's organized. Disadvantages basically depend on the way that it's organized. So you need to make sure that if you're organizing a large organization to do anything, a lot of people to do anything, it turns into chaos very quickly if it's not organized well. And organizing something well at that scale takes knowledge and takes systems and processes and takes management structures and all that stuff. And that needs to be in place if this is going to work well. And just to make the point, it's not distributed, it's devolved. So the central team have the responsibility and the overall control of the whole website, the whole content function, and they choose to devolve certain aspects of that in whatever way makes sense. So it may be that they devolve news, it may be that they devolve local-based content, it may be that they devolve, what else? Like blogging, social media. It may be that they devolve specialist content where a high degree of technical knowledge is required for that user, for that audience. But it's done in an organised way. It's not just a kind of free for all like in the distributed model. So this is one example of how you might organise it. It doesn't need to be this complex. It depends on the size of your organisation and how things are working out. But what we've got is we've got a hub and we've got a spoke. So the hub has got some extra functionality that it can lend, or that the spokes can access, and it's got an oversight of all of the spokes. And then you've got a governance board above the hub, and the governance board should ideally be made up of fairly senior representatives from around the organisation who have a decent understanding of the issues of digital and the specific things you need to be aware of with digital products and services. And the benefit of that is that you don't want the digital team or the content team to be doing content to the organisation. You want them to be doing what they're doing with the organisation, and a governance board that's got buy-in from across the organisation ensures that that's the case. It becomes an escalation route for people outside of this function, and it also becomes a way that if the content team or the wider digital team is having issues with some area in the organisation, they've got a way that they can address that, a place that can address that. And then above that, you've got some kind of big boss who should be very, very senior in the organisation and should have the final say if things come to loggerheads and can't be resolved. But that should be like, once a year. It should be a very, very rare occurrence. Hopefully everybody's grown up and they can play nice. And then the final model is the matrix. And unfortunately, it's not so much like Neo, and it's a bit more like a spreadsheet. So it's called a matrix because it looks like a matrix in that sense. Matrix management came out of the 80s. It came out of very large kind of multinational organizations who were trying to work out how you coordinate very large organizations. So you'd have, for instance, an office in London, an office in Tokyo, an office in New York, an office in Milan, whatever. And they were all doing stuff. And they had a mix of functions, a mix of different kinds of professionals in those offices. But then you also had content, you had design, you had engineering, you had, whatever. And the matrix allowed somebody to be in charge of, say, content across the whole organization, and somebody to be in charge of everything that happens in London. And then you've got a person that sits in London in content, who is one of the cells in this matrix. So you can do that in content. You can think of it in terms of channels and themes. So it might be different parts of the organization responsible for different subject areas. And then you've got people responsible for different channels. And so you'd have somebody who's responsible for this theme on the website. And this is another example. So you've got different departments, you've got different functions, and you've got a person who's like a content designer in department 2. So what are the advantages of the matrix model? Well, it's designed for the large scale. So if you're in a large organization, that's what it's built for. It allows and requires, in fact, communities of practice. So if you're in a content function and you're in the Outer Hebrides, and you would otherwise be very isolated, actually you're part of a content function that's got somebody that's the head of that content function that is making sure that you're plugged in, which breaks down the silos. So because you've got somebody responsible for London and you've got somebody responsible for content, that means that everybody is operating in two modes, which breaks down the silos. Disadvantages, though, it means that if you're responsible for London and you've got to get some content done, and the head of content who's sitting in Helsinki is saying that you can't do it that way, or it's not priority, or they're saying this doesn't fit with our plan, you might be responsible for getting that content done, but you don't actually have control over whether it gets done or not. And if you're the person in Helsinki who's responsible for making the actual content designer in Helsinki, and you've got one boss telling you to do one thing and the other boss telling you can't do it, that can lead to confusion and resentment. And even when it's working well, if you're used to having one line manager and being told what to do and getting on and doing it, and then your line manager says, good job, the matrix model can be quite anxiety inducing. It's a bit more anarchic than that. It requires more initiative, more kind of self-management. And some people don't thrive in that sort of environment. Okay, so they're your basic approaches to organising content teams or content functions. But what I want to do now is just move beyond the idea of the content team a little bit into the multidisciplinary team, which is increasingly used, especially in agile ways of working. So let's talk about agile. Agile is based on meeting user needs, essentially. It's everything is organised around how do we best meet the needs of our users or our customers. And that leads to different ways of organising things and different results. So team design differs depending on where you're at and what you want to achieve. And agile is built around flexibility and responsiveness to learning. And so as you learn more as the project goes on, it's designed to be able to change shape. Teams tend to be a bit more fluid in agile than they are in sort of traditional kind of approaches to running things. And agile breaks things down into phases, and the team shape is likely to be different depending on the phase. So this is a visualization of agile from the Government Digital Service, GDS, in the UK. So we start with user needs, and then we've got these different agile phases. So we've got discovery, alpha, beta, live. Okay. Discovery is about kind of understanding the problem and coming up with some idea about how to tackle that problem. Alpha is about creating innovative solutions in a kind of like lo-fi, quick way based on all the data, all the research you got during the discovery phase. Beta is about scaling whatever the solution you found that feels stable and feels like it should be scaled. And then live is essentially what you might call BAU, business as usual. It still contains aspects of the other phases, but it's much more of a stable thing, stable phase. So the different kinds of team that you might want for those different things. Discovery and alpha are both generally very multidisciplinary, quite small teams. You might have one content person on them. Ideally, you would have a content designer or content strategist as part of the team, but that's not always the case. Too many content designers despair. But yeah, so you might have a content designer, a user researcher, a developer, delivery manager, service designer, like whoever makes sense. It's a small team working quite quickly for a short period of time through getting to something that looks like it's scalable. So then when you're scaling something, if it's a content product, if it's a content-based product or a content-based service, then essentially what you're scaling is the content. which means you're writing a lot, you're creating a lot of content assets, and therefore it makes sense to have largely a content team. It won't be solely a content team. You still want some kind of user research, some user testing. You might have kind of UX, UI design. There are different aspects that you would want to include, but it will be content-heavy team. And then when you move to live, again, if it's a content, if you're talking about a website that's largely information-based and kind of content-heavy, then it makes sense for that to be a content team almost exclusively. So I just want to finish by taking that a little bit further and talking about tribes, squads, chapters, and guilds, which is the way that Spotify have scaled Agile across the whole organisation. I'm by no means an expert in this. I've never worked at Spotify, but this is talked about a lot as a way to do Agile at scale. And it kind of fits with some of the things we've been talking about matrix and how to organise things. So I'll just talk about that briefly. But there's plenty online. This is one link which you'll get when the slides get sent around. But Spotify talk quite a lot about Agile themselves. So just dig around on the internet for a bit if you're interested. But this is a diagram of how you might organise teams. So the squad on the left is like one multidisciplinary team. So if you imagine like the yellow dot is a content designer, that squad is involved in a project, and maybe that project is part of a wider program, and therefore it makes sense to organise into a tribe to deliver that program. So what we're doing at the University of Southampton is kind of like that. We've got about 5 delivery teams that are all working in a squad-like way in scrums. Together you could call it a tribe. And if you see all the yellow dots in that tribe, that's called a chapter, which is essentially a community of practice. So again, like going back to the matrix idea, you've got people cutting across what could otherwise be silos and talking together about issues that go across the whole thing. And then you can build it out. Guilds, alliances. Guilds are people who share an area of interest, no matter what their discipline. But yeah, have a read online if you would like to know more about that, because like I say, I'm by no means an expert, but it kind of fits in with what we've been talking about. And finally, just to say, my book is available. It is free. You can download it, and you would be welcome to. It has got a chapter on organising content teams, and it's also got a lot of other lovely chapters as well. So, thank you very much.